as the screen says, I'm Paul Krofssik, Director of Training with Digital Watchdog. I think my official title is Education Programs, but Director of Training is fine. You feel free to send me an email, paulk@digital-watchdog.com. As I said before, we will record this and it will be posted tomorrow or no later than Tuesday, because I think Monday's Memorial Day. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about our Digital Watchdog encoder, which has some pretty fun and unique features built into it, along with being just a great way to extend the life of some of your customers' analog cameras that they're quite not ready to part with for whatever reason. All right. So first things first, a little information about our products. All our products are now NDAA compliant. I think we had one or two that were on hand that didn't quite fill the bill, but now I think everything is NDAA compliant, GSA and or TAA compliant. So all these things are important when you're dealing, especially with government and GSA contracts, or where government grant money is being used. And then sometimes as integrator, you may not even know where the money is coming from to do this. So let's go over some of the basics. So basics are, this converts analog to IP signals. It encodes the data from an analog camera to IP for recording on a VMS or an NVR. It has 16 inputs. It does HD analog, HD CVI, and HD TVI, and is fully integrated with Spectrum. So what that means is it covers all the bases. So all the major protocols out there and cameras, it can decode them. It pretty much does it automatically. I've plugged in a few old cameras from different manufacturers in it and newer cameras, and it seems to, the auto setting seems to work great in it. It has a dual stream support. So much like a regular IP camera, it'll give us as high-res stream as possible from the camera. So in some cases, 4K. And then it'll also give us a second stream that we can use for other stuff in the VMS. All right. So here's a view of the back of the unit. You've got audio inputs. You've got alarm ins and alarm outs for triggering. There's 16 alarm ins, 8 alarm outs. You have 8 audio inputs, which you can assign to any channel. You have, of course, your 16 analog inputs. You've got even an output for an old school monitor that has the BNC input on it. We've all seen those before. It does have the dual HDMI and VGA outputs, but because of the fact the cameras now are so high res, starting, let's just say, there's some that, of course, will be the old analog. There's a bunch out there that are 2 megapixels, but there's a lot that are 3, 4, 5, and 4K. That it best be just use the HDMI output to a monitor that supports HDMI and at least 1080p. You can plug in a 4K monitor, and it supports full 4K resolution out of that output. Some of the other specs, again, supports all the different formats: HD TVI, HD CVI, H.264, H.265 compression, gigabit networking, and your different resolutions: 2 megapixel, 4 megapixel, 5 megapixel, and certification CE and FCC compliant. So again, and a small form factor, but rack mountable. So it is a cost-effective path. It's reasonable cost. I've got to move something out of my way. Something just popped up in front of my window for some reason. These are fully integrated with Digital Watchdog Spectrum. It will require a record license. We make 2 different record licenses for the encoders, which have less costs on them. And it's the SPC P04 LSC04, which is the 4-channel one. And then there's the 16-channel one. So you can just put 4 cameras into it, or 8 cameras, or 12, and you buy 3 4s. Or you want to fill the whole thing up, you get 16. And sometimes we run special offers for licenses or stuff like that. So obviously talk to your sales reps and things like that about anything that's discount based or whatever. But again, we're talking about a really good encoder, fully integrated with Spectrum. And again, you can bring up we actually see this, the on-screen display and PTZ control of the camera. You've got one RS485 interface for PTZ control, but if you had 16 PTZ cameras on it and you program them properly, you can control 16 PTZ cameras on it. So if someone has a bunch of old Pelco P cameras up there, and they got the cables all run. You can run and command them as long as you know their RS-45 ID. These ship with the rack mount ears, so you don't have to order them separately, or I forgot them, whatever. The rack mount ears are in the box for you guys. So that's one of them. So let's talk about setup. So when you first fire the thing up, you see a screen like this. It'll show whatever cameras you have plugged in, the display. There are some setup options at the bottom when you click on a camera, or you can go to the main setup, which is this button over here, or choose your different displays. Is a camera an alarm, network settings, and things like that. But that's on the interface of the unit itself. Ideally, you bring even if it's a small monitor with you, but you bring a monitor with you, you do some of the setup on the unit to make sure everything's satisfactory. And then you let Spectrum talk to it. And we're going to tell you how you can do the setup through Spectrum and through the web browser. So when you click the setup button, you bring this up and you bring up this layout, and allows you to edit the camera signal, edit the camera, which includes changing its name, how it's going to encode, PTZ settings, any event you want it to produce from the unit itself, your network settings, and your basic information. So one of the things you can go in and click setup, and you can click, it's actually Iris Plus button. You can bring up the setup of the camera over there. If you see it on the left-hand side up here in this quadrant, you can go change exposure, color, day-night settings, your different functions. You have motion in the camera, but again, I'll probably say this 3 times. We always encourage you just to let Spectrum do the motion detection. It really has the best motion detection setup, so you don't really have to do it. But if you're using another VMS and you've got to do motion, the motion may have to come from the device like the camera or the encoder. Of course, we have it in there for you to use with that. So we also built in this is a manual snapshot function. You're like, that's no big deal, because we all know you have that same feature in Spectrum. Okay. But it's just interesting. They have different things on the display of this unit. I just wanted to go over some of these functions with you. Now, of course, when you go in here, we can go in and make changes to brightness, saturation, contrast, sharpness. There is a lens control, zoom it in and out, get it just where you want it. So you can do this setup from here. Okay. All these settings are duplicated in the web interface, which I'll show you part of that in a few minutes. You can see you can just roll through the different options, bring up the different settings. Now you notice it has the little thing, shows the camera and alarm. Now this won't be translated into Spectrum unless you want it to be translated, by the way, this on-screen display. You just get it what's called a clean output from Spectrum, and then Spectrum, as we said before, is doing most of the work for you as far as motion detection. So you can go in here, change your camera signal. Auto usually works great. Sometimes you got to go in and force something to clean up by using their light mode. You can set your bit rate, your frame rate, and all that stuff here, but Spectrum is going to do it for you. This is a fully integrated piece with Spectrum. So the command comes down from Spectrum, and you want to change the frame rate, whatever, bit rate, all that stuff can be done from inside Spectrum. I'm just showing you where it is in here in case you're going to use it with a third-party application. But there's image shift, so you can get it in the right spot. There's sharpness. If it has WDR, that would light up if it has other backlight compensation. But the actual settings for the cameras are very, very complete. All right. So again, you come over here, you got the motion settings. And again, we're just going to show you the different motion settings. You click it, you configure it. This shows you that if you want it to pop up on video or whatever, you have exception handling. You've got whether you've got alarms, you've got a couple cameras in motion alarm status if you want an alarm on motion, which you don't. As you can see, DHCP, we enable OnVIF from the factory. So all these different settings are in here that you can do here, but the majority of them will be done when you do your settings in Spectrum. So now let's talk about the other side of this setup, which I think you guys are going to use more than the other one. And that's the web interface. As far as layout is very similar to the main unit's layout. So if we go over here, this is what you'll be faced with when you type in the URL and go in, put your username and password, and you'll be faced with this page. It doesn't do multi-camera, it does single camera. But then when you click the function panel, you then go to this page. And this page, you notice the menu is the same as what's on the main settings page. So as long as you have the IP setup of the unit, you can do this from the web interface, which means you can do it from Spectrum, because Spectrum has a full Chrome browser built into it. All right. So we can go in here and say analog, what version. Again, if there's a older, I think it's DW, but older, some of the older cameras use a different form of CVI. And so you got to go in and maybe choose CVI. If they have a light mode, I think that was a TVI thing. You sometimes have to enable that because the camera will look a little desaturated, almost black and white on it. So you got to, there's a couple of parameters you could manually change, but auto seems to work all the time. And you can tweak these settings here. You can get a preview of what the camera looks like. You can change its name here, and Spectrum actually recognizes that name. We can go in and change the brightness, the contrast, the saturation, right? We can do it by number or by slider. We can choose the different cameras. We have the advanced settings. We can go in and even set up masking. Okay, so you can mask out a certain area. Again, I've noticed that it's more of a Canada thing than a US thing. Very rarely do we have the mask an area because someone might be looking at being able to see someone's front yard. So you mask that area off for that. That's mostly a PTZ thing, but it's nice to have it built into the unit anyway, just in case you come across it. Or the old system had masks set up, and you have the ability now to duplicate that here. And again, you can do the motion settings from here. And as I said, most of you guys, I think, will be using Spectrum, so we won't have to worry about that as much, obviously, because Spectrum is going to do all the motion detection for you, and you can leave this section alone. Or you might be able to turn it on for other things like motion triggers an alarm out on this or something like that. All right. Again, you can go into your settings and you can see you have your PTZ protocol. So if it's a regular HD over coax camera, there are really two protocols, and it will move the camera. But also you have those older analog cameras with Pelco C, Pelco D, and you can then set a custom address in it. The top one doesn't matter. You don't have to change the addressing. It's these other ones that need the RS-485 addressing in it. So, and it's been a while since I messed with one of those, so probably I'd struggle with setting one up. But if you already have the information in advanced, in the older cameras that are PTZ, you reboot them, and when they first come up, you've got to, of course, be watching them on a screen, right? You'll come up, they'll tell you their baud rate, their address, their parity information, and things like that. So that's one of the ways you write it down, and then you find camera 2 or what you think is camera 2, and you bring it up. Oh, that's camera actually 22, and so on. So the ID will be right there on the camera. It's just getting the information, especially if it wasn't documented before. Spectrum auto discovers this, and only if you plug a camera into the input does it populate here. So you won't see, even though this is 16-channel encoder, you won't see, what would that be? 13 blank ones underneath it. So if you plug in the fourth one, takes about 30 seconds, that other camera pops up, and then you tell it to record and do all the other things you're going to do in Spectrum to make it work. So I really like that. So your encoder is a 1-channel encoder, a 4-channel encoder, a 7-channel encoder, a 9-channel encoder, 13-channel encoder, or 16-channel encoder. It'll just populate what is there. Even if you plug in an oddball input, like you plug in 16, it'll just say channel, under channel 3, it'll just say channel 16. Really good way it interfaces with Spectrum. So the next thing is, of course, you find it here, you go to camera settings, you have your different camera settings for aspect ratio, which you can then force each camera. If they're especially older cameras, they're all 4:3 aspect ratio. You can force them to 16:9, or take the one or two, maybe 16:9 cameras you have and make them 4:3 aspect ratio, so everything matches and looks nice on the screen, and things like that. Now, when you can also, though, access the web setup in Spectrum from the unit. Now, there is one trick you got to do. is when it pops up like a 4x3 sort of squarish windows. But if you grab over here, you can just stretch it over and then you can see the whole setup. All right. And you go in, you click function panel, and then you go to your first page. You can go in here and then you can set your time. And as things go on, got to make sure we set the time on all your devices correctly. If you use our IP finder, that will allow you to bulk set the time on all your IP cameras, all these things, because that's very important that you go in there and make sure the time is correct. As things go on, they're going to heighten security with different encryptions and things like that in order to meet different governments' rules and regulations. And so they're going to do more where they're going to say the time doesn't match, you can't log in. So keep that in mind. Also, our new IP finder is going to be released. I don't have a copy of it yet, but it's going to pull the serial number from the unit. When we release it, I'll do a little sidebar with that. So that's the basics of the encoder, fully integrated with Spectrum, 4K analog cameras, really regardless of the manufacturer, 5 megapixel, 4 megapixel, 2 megapixel, and of course the older cameras that just people don't want to give up on yet. I'm going to also talk a couple of other things, including updates for Blackjack AI. So we have a software update that came out for Blackjack AI, and it's version 2.9, and we have improved filtering of small animals, because what we're doing is we're not trying to detect a cat or a dog. We're creating rejections of those things. So this way it can be the important subjects of surveillance, which is people or important objects. So improved filtering of small animals designed to reject those much more accurately. Okay. Added a bus vehicle classification. So you got van, truck, bus. Also added fall detection. Okay, so it has fall detection built in. So if someone lays on the ground and they're on the ground for, I forget how the longer period of time you can set for, 1 second for up to 3 minutes or something like that, it'll create an alert for you that someone fell. All right. The versions are AI Server 2.9 R3. Then we have the configuration tool 2.9.5, and then the Spectrum plugin, which is 2.4.49. We have these located at Spectrum download windows, and then you can look at your whatever AI server or appliance you have. You can look at product detail that, and then you come to a page like this, and we allow you to download it. We have instructions on how to install it. Okay, it's relatively easy. I think the last time it took me 5 minutes to do. It updates the NVIDIA base because we use NVIDIA GPUs. It updates the Blackjack server itself and the config tool. Okay. And then you drop in the new plugin. When we release 5.1.4 or 5.1.5 or whatever the next release is, we'll have the plug buried in Spectrum. So you won't have to install the plugin. Right now, you got to drop the plugin in and you can do that. Now, also, this is what the interface looks like now. So you've got person, bicycle, motorcycle, truck, van, forklift. Okay. And then your different rules, all that stays the same. And if you go to the cameras and you look at the camera and you bring up the cameras, they have the same layout, almost identically, slightly different because, of course, the server now does color. Okay, so it recognizes color and it recognizes whether a person falls. So the search has also been improved. So now I'm going to pull out a motorcycle. Already got a motorcycle on the screen. We're going to scroll back in time, way back, and we're just going to play something back from the 9th at, what is that, early in the morning. And then just hit play. And it's going to begin looking for those items. And then motorcycle goes by, another motorcycle goes by, and so on. Now, in Spectrum is fall detection active. You set the duration, and then you set your percent threshold. What that means is confidence threshold that someone has actually fallen. 0 means it'll just anyone falls, but there might be something that's a little different or a little off. You can go in and If that doesn't work quite right, I don't know if you have someone laying the ground to test it, but you go in and you crank that up just in case it's detecting like a box as a fallen person, and then that will clean that up. Usually you only have to go up by a couple percent to clean that up, but that's, you do it in Spectrum. All right. Now, when we go to here, the next one, we then go in and we do our search. We do our search for color, and it will bring up green truck. If someone's wearing blue and they're crossing green on our lawn, the blue changes to green for a second and does it. So just keep that in mind. It will occasionally flip the color. Now, there are new features that we've put in Spectrum in really 5.0, and one of them is cross system layouts. So if you have access to multiple systems, you can go in and have a system that's in, let's say you've got 10 stores, and each 10 is that each of those systems is just a tile on your screen. You can bring and drag in the front door from all those stores from each different ones, even though they're not merged. Okay. So going to have unmerged systems, as long as you have access to them, can be on a layout, what we call a cross system layout. The other thing that was a big one, it was camera replacement. Say you got an old camera in there. Again, Spectrum supports old cameras and new cameras, and it bites the dust, and you went replaced it. It was an old 2 megapixel, you upgraded it to 4 or 5. You can now have that archive go together. So even though the other one won't look as good, the old archive won't look as good, it'll be together on the same line, the same screen or whatever, and very easy to replace. It's just a right mouse button click, and you say replace camera on the one that's got the X through it, and then you can replace it with another camera you've plugged in. Make it much easier to keep the archives together for those cameras. Another thing that's a new release is we, of course, released our AMPR camera, and we've had a webinar on those. We may do a more advanced webinar in the future, but we did release 2 other bullets that are AI 5 megapixel with a 5 to 50 p iris lens, and one with a 2.7 to 13 millimeter motorized zoom. It is our newer form factor. And what we're doing is, although we have the same separation here, we're putting the IRs at the bottom with a different orientation to try to keep as much reflection away from the main lens as possible. Okay, so it's a sort of a new format. They're also shorter, so they're be a little less obtrusive and probably a little easier to install. And then, of course, we released this guy, which is a 5 megapixel camera with built-in lights that you can control and manage from Spectrum: white light, red light, blue light, along with the AI that we've talked about in the past in previous webinars. 2-way audio with a built-in mic and speaker. So this way you have a complete package with this thing. You put it up, detects a person, you can sit there and talk down to them. It also has an audio out, so if you want to go to a louder speaker or something like that. So let's see. We got a question from Nick Phillips. Will the AI work with other third-party AI-capable cameras such as Hikvision, AccuSense? So if you're using a Blackjack AI server, you can have the AI from the camera work alongside our AI, but there might be some confusion on how the data is coming down if you're detecting a person and we're detecting a person. So I would choose one or the other, okay, rather than use both. But maybe the Hikvision has a different analytic than we have that you need to use, but it will work in Spectrum. So you can choose it or not choose it, whatever. Now, another camera update is the fact that we've been working with Genetec and Milestone and Exact. And so we're having, as our cameras are released, we're having our cameras put in and made fully compatible with theirs. So they're discoverable in Genetec, in Milestone, in Exact, to make the installation a little easier rather than just choosing it as an ONVIF device. So you'll be, those of you that use Genetec, you go to their website and you can do a search for what's compatible, and you can go in and search for the camera and say, okay, that camera was recommended to me and it works fine with Genetec. So another thing we released, and again, some of you guys are sales, some of you guys are technical, is Dwayne. So Dwayne is our AI chatbot, I guess they're called, and you can ask it some questions. It actually is very nice, tries to ask you what brings you here today. So I asked it a couple questions, and I'll bring it up here for you. So I want to know about integrations. What integrations do you have? And it talks a little bit about C2P middleware, which you can display events, and then you can carry systems, and then it brings you right to the integration section. And then underneath that are links to other sources. So I said, okay, that's a little easy. So this is a question we get a lot, is getting an RTSP stream from Spectrum versus the camera. And this gave a very good answer, okay, that you needed the ID of the camera from Spectrum, okay, and then you put it gives you the RTSP format, and then further down, it gives you the links to the documents. And I actually deliberately did some bad grammar to see if it would fool it, and it worked very well. So just an easier way for you guys to search on our website. One more thing is we have our event schedule coming up, and our events are in-person live trainings. We have in these, of course, training for Spectrum, the ins and outs on how to set it up, what all the check boxes mean, what the different items on there mean, along with training for setting up and using the AI cameras. There's no setup on the AI cameras, but using the AI cameras in Spectrum and getting the most out of them. So these are our live ones. We have one coming up in Minneapolis, New Jersey, Salt Lake City, and in Tampa. And we'll be adding more in the coming days. I think we have Boston, or actually Woburn, Massachusetts, and then right near the BWI airport. So we have contracts pending for venues. For those, we'll be adding those. So if you guys want to do some live training, we have live training available. Now, on the other side of that, we also have our other calendar, which is Digital Watchdog calendar, which shows, of course, your certification ones, where we're going to be as far as trade shows and things like that. But also we have a customer for ADI Expo, DW training, but also we have these in-person trainings, which should be populated here. I think that this may be one of them. And it'll be in-person trainings where they'll just go over, basically it's a little bit of Spectrum, a lot AI with it. And by all means, take advantage of that. And that is the end. Is there any questions for me about Encoder, Spectrum,